She was just adjusting her silk gloves when she heard it, the faint, metallic scent of blood lingering in a gilded, silent mansion. The glamorous detective, Phryne Fisher, knew instinctively. Lady Eleanor Ashworth hadn't simply vanished. She was gone. Tonight, we descend into the intoxicating, dangerous world of 1920s London, where shimmering silk conceals sharp steel, and grand ballrooms hide the city's deadliest secrets. Our heroine, a bold, sharp-witted socialite, must infiltrate the elite widows' club, a society built on staggering inherited wealth and absolute, terrifying silence. She's stepping onto a stage set for blackmail, betrayal, and mass murder. Her only complication? The brooding inspector from Scotland Yard who wants her safe, out of trouble, and perhaps, if the tension gets high enough, in his arms. Join us as we plunge into a mystery packed with shocking discoveries, witty exchanges, and escalating danger, where every chapter ends with a twist. The game is afoot, and the final score is blood. Before we dive in, do us a quick favor. Click on that subscribe button, turn on the bell notification, and tell us where you're watching from. We love knowing how far these stories travel. Prologue. The rain lashed against the windows of the taxi, blurring the glittering chaos of London's West End into streaks of gold and crimson. My heart, usually as steady as a seasoned gambler's hand, was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Not from fear, never from fear. From a cold, sharp dread that twisted my gut, a feeling I hadn't known since my own world shattered. My driver, a grizzled man named Arthur, glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "You're awfully quiet tonight, Miss Phryne. Not like you to pass up a good scandal." I managed a tight smile, adjusting the cloche hat that barely contained my unruly dark bob. "Some scandals, Arthur, are too grim for witty banter." He grunted, pulling the cab to a stop outside a towering Gothic revival mansion that loomed like a stone gargoyle against the stormy sky. "Here we are, the esteemed Blackwood Manor. More ghosts in that place than in a forgotten cemetery, they say." Blackwood Manor. The last known whereabouts of Lady Eleanor Ashworth. Eleanor, with her sharp wit and even sharper tongue, who had vanished into thin air 3 nights ago. The official report called it a voluntary departure. The whispers in every smoky speakeasy and hushed salon called it something far more sinister. I, Phryne Fisher, intended to find out which it was. Stepping out, the wind snatched at my silk scarf, whipping it around my face like a silken noose. The grand oak doors of the manor were shut tight, guardians of secrets. I pushed the heavy doorbell, the chime echoing like a funeral knell within. A moment later, a thin, nervous butler opened it a crack, his eyes wide with suspicion. "Miss Fisher. You're expected." His voice trembled. I swept past him, my emerald green gown shimmering under the dim gaslight of the foyer. The air was thick with the scent of lilies, the flower of death, I noted grimly. The grand hall was cavernous, silent save for the drip of rain against the leaded windows. A grand staircase, carpeted in deep crimson, spiraled upwards into darkness. "Lady Ashworth's study," the butler mumbled, pointing to a door at the far end of the hall. My gaze drifted to a large portrait hanging above the mantelpiece, a stern, unsmiling man in a military uniform. Eleanor's late husband, General Alastair Ashworth. "Died mysteriously in the Great War," they said. Another whisper, another mystery. As I approached the study, a faint metallic scent pricked at my nostrils. Copper. Blood. My heart gave a sickening lurch. I pushed the door open without a knock. The study was in disarray. Papers scattered across the mahogany desk, a half-empty teacup with a lipstick stain beside a crumpled handkerchief. But it was the other detail that made my breath catch in my throat. On the plush oriental rug, near the fireplace, was a faint, dark smear, almost invisible against the deep colors, but undeniable to my trained eye. Fresh blood. Not much, just a smear, as if something had been dragged. A cold dread, far deeper than any rain-soaked chill, settled over me. This wasn't a voluntary departure. This was a cover-up. And Eleanor Ashworth, I feared, was not merely missing. She was gone. Suddenly, a voice, deep and resonant, cut through the silence. Well, well, if it isn't the notorious Miss Fisher. Always where you're least wanted, and most intrigued. I turned, my hand instinctively going to the small, pearl-handled revolver tucked into my purse. Standing in the doorway, framed against the faint light from the hall, was a man whose presence was as imposing as the manor itself. Tall, impeccably dressed in a dark suit, with eyes like chips of flint and a jawline carved from granite. Inspector Jack Robinson of Scotland Yard. My nemesis. My reluctant ally. And, to my unending frustration, the only man who could ruffle my composure. He leaned against the doorframe, a hint of a challenge in his gaze. I assume you're here to offer your unique services to the Ashworth family, despite strict instructions from the yard to leave this matter to us. My lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. Inspector. And I assume you're here to stand around looking terribly official while the truth slips through your fingers, as per usual. His jaw tightened. The truth, Miss Fisher, is rarely found by trespassing. This is a private investigation. And the truth, Inspector, I countered, stepping closer to the bloodstain, rarely cares for official boundaries. I gestured subtly with my foot towards the barely visible mark on the rug. Unless, of course, Scotland Yard has suddenly started believing in spontaneous nosebleeds in the middle of a struggle. Robinson's eyes followed my gaze. His composed facade cracked, just for a second, revealing a flash of surprise, then something akin to recognition. He hadn't seen it. The official investigation, so focused on protocol, had missed the most glaring detail. The thought gave me a perverse thrill. He knelt, examining the spot, his brow furrowed. That wasn't in the initial report. Perhaps, I purred, enjoying his discomfort, your constables need to spend less time polishing their buttons and more time polishing their observation skills. He rose, his gaze meeting mine, and for a fleeting moment, the professional antagonism between us seemed to dissipate, replaced by a shared understanding of the gravity of the situation. What do you propose, Miss Fisher? I propose, Inspector, I said, my voice dropping to a serious whisper, that Lady Eleanor Ashworth didn't just depart. I propose she was taken. And I propose we find out who and why. The rain outside intensified, a drumbeat against the old house. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken questions and the scent of impending danger. The Widows' Club, an exclusive society for women whose powerful husbands had met untimely ends, suddenly felt less like a social gathering and more like a den of vipers. And I, Phryne Fisher, was about to walk right into it. The game, as they say, was afoot. And I had a feeling this particular game would be deadly. Chapter 1. The exclusive tea room of the Grand Hotel buzzed with the muted clinking of porcelain and the low hum of hushed conversations. Sunlight, struggling to penetrate the perpetual London gloom, dappled through the ornate windows, illuminating motes of dust dancing in the air. Here, amidst the velvet settees and crystal chandeliers, the city's most influential and wealthiest women gathered. And amongst them, like a perfectly polished serpent, was the Widows' Club. I sat at a discreet table, sipping Earl Grey, my eyes sweeping over the room. My outfit, a sleek, tailored suit in midnight blue, was understated yet undeniably chic, allowing me to blend in while still radiating an air of untouchable elegance. It was a costume, like all my personas, designed to gain access. My target was at the central table, surrounded by her cohorts. Lady Beatrice Sinclair, the formidable matriarch of the club, a woman whose iron will was barely concealed beneath layers of expensive lace and pearls. The first step in any good infiltration was observation. The widows, all impeccably dressed in varying shades of black and muted tones, carried an aura of carefully cultivated grief, but beneath it, I detected something else, a shared secret, perhaps, or a collective paranoia. They were a carefully curated collection of women, each with a tragic backstory and immense inherited wealth. And one of their own, Lady Eleanor Ashworth, was now a ghost. My waiter, a young man with darting eyes, refilled my cup. "Another pot, Miss Fisher?" "Just one more," I smiled, my voice low. "And perhaps you could direct me to the powder room?" He nodded, giving me directions. It was a ruse, of course. I needed to move, to get closer, to create a ripple in their carefully controlled environment. As I passed the central table, I accidentally brushed against Lady Beatrice, causing a delicate teacup to clatter precariously. "Oh, my sincerest apologies, Lady Sinclair," I exclaimed, my tone perfectly pitched between genuine regret and a charmingly clumsy awkwardness. "How dreadfully careless of me." Beatrice, her lips a thin line, waved a dismissive hand. Her eyes, however, held a flicker of shrewd assessment. "No harm done, Miss Fisher," I supplied, extending a gloved hand. "Phryne Fisher. I've just returned from a rather lengthy stay abroad, and am quite out of touch with London's finer establishments." A partial truth, always more convincing. "I'm afraid I found myself quite lost in the grandeur of your magnificent city." A flicker of something, amusement, perhaps, or a challenge, crossed her face. "Indeed. And what brings you back to our humble shores, Miss Fisher?" "An unfortunate inheritance," I sighed dramatically, "and a rather tedious legal battle. My late husband, you see, was rather fond of unconventional investments." Another convenient fiction. My own widowhood was a distant, painful memory I rarely invoked. I find myself in need of guidance on navigating this new, rather bewildering financial landscape. Bingo. Money. The universal language. The other widows at the table exchanged glances. They were, after all, a club built on the foundations of inherited wealth and the mysteries surrounding its acquisition. Lady Beatrice's expression softened, ever so slightly. "Then perhaps you should consider attending our weekly luncheon. We discuss matters of import." Her gaze was sharp, probing. She was testing me, measuring my worth. "I would be delighted, Lady Sinclair," I replied, my smile unwavering. "Perhaps I might even find some kindred spirits." I excused myself, making my way to the powder room as promised. But instead of touching up my lipstick, I located the small service entrance the waiter had pointed out. It led to a back staircase, dimly lit and smelling faintly of disinfectant. Perfect. Following the stairs down, I found myself in the bustling, noisy heart of the hotel kitchen. Cooks yelled orders, pots clanged, and the air was thick with the scent of roasted meats and simmering sauces. My sharp eyes scanned the faces, searching for anything out of place. And then I saw him. Inspector Jack Robinson. He was disguised, rather poorly, as a delivery man, a cap pulled low over his eyes, a smudge of flour on his cheek. But the way he held himself, the keen intensity in his gaze as he surveyed the busy kitchen, was unmistakable. He was following the same lead, no doubt, but through official channels. And now, our paths had collided once more. He caught my eye across the chaotic kitchen, and for a split second, a look of pure exasperation crossed his face. I gave him a small, triumphant smirk. "Two can play at this game, Inspector." I sidled up to a scullery maid who was diligently scrubbing pots. "Excuse me, love," I said, affecting a slightly more common accent. "I seem to have lost my way. Where might I find the general manager's office?" The maid, startled, pointed a soapy finger down a narrow corridor. "Just there, miss. At the end." I winked at her, then headed down the corridor. As I passed a small, cramped office, the door ajar, I heard voices within. Robinson's deep tones, and another, higher-pitched, nervous voice. "I'm telling you, Inspector, she vanished," the voice squeaked. One moment she was here, planning her trip to the countryside, the next, poof, gone. I pressed my ear closer, careful not to be seen. It was the hotel manager, sounding terrified. "And you saw no one?" Robinson pressed, his voice taut with frustration. "No suspicious characters? No arguments? Nothing out of the ordinary?" "No, sir. Nothing." Lady Ashworth was a quiet woman, kept to herself, mostly. But she did receive a rather urgent letter the day she disappeared, sent by special courier. My blood quickened. A letter. A clue. "Did you see who delivered it?" Robinson asked, his voice sharp. "No, sir. Just a young lad, in a cycling cap. Left it and was gone before I could get a good look." "And the letter itself? Did you notice anything about it?" A pause, filled with the manager's nervous shuffling. "It was quite plain, sir. No fancy wax seals. Just a simple white envelope. But there was a strange symbol on the back. Like a spider. Or a web." A chill ran down my spine. A spider. A web. A cunning predator, trapping its prey. This was far more intricate than a simple disappearance. This was a hunt. Just then, the manager's voice rose slightly. "But Inspector, about that club. The Widows' Club. They're rather particular about their privacy." Lady Ashworth was a devoted member. Robinson sighed, a sound of deep weariness. "Yes, I'm aware, Mr. Davies. Which is precisely why I need to find out what she was involved in. These women, they seem to have a knack for attracting trouble." I heard the scraping of a chair, signaling the end of the conversation. I slipped away quickly, returning to the tea room with a practiced nonchalance. I glanced at Robinson's delivery man disguise across the kitchen. He was leaving, no doubt heading back to Scotland Yard to process this new information. The spider symbol. It lingered in my mind. A secret society. A coded message. This case was unraveling into something deliciously complex. And I, Phryne Fisher, was perfectly poised to become entangled in its threads. As I took my seat, a sudden commotion erupted near the entrance. A well-dressed man, his face flushed with anger, was arguing heatedly with a waiter. My instincts, rarely wrong, screamed red herring. But what was it meant to distract from? My gaze drifted back to the Widows' Club table. Lady Beatrice Sinclair was observing the scene with an almost imperceptible smirk. A flicker of something in her eyes, a knowing glint, suggested she was very much aware of the chaos, and perhaps even orchestrating it. The pieces were beginning to connect, forming a disturbing picture. Eleanor Ashworth's vanishing act, the bloodstain, the cryptic letter with the spider symbol, and now, my infiltration into this secretive, powerful club. This was no simple missing persons case. This was a deadly game of cat and mouse, and I had a feeling the mouse was already in the trap. And I, audacious and unafraid, was about to join her. The waiter finally managed to escort the angry man out, and a hush fell over the tea room. Lady Beatrice caught my eye, a challenge in her gaze. She knew. She knew I was here for more than just a cup of tea and financial advice. And the game, as it always did, had just gotten infinitely more interesting. Chapter 2. The Grand Hotel tea room was suddenly too small, too bright. I could feel Inspector Robinson's gaze, sharp as a stiletto, tracking me even through his poor disguise and the maze of the kitchen. He was a creature of duty, rigid and predictable, which made him both a tedious rival and a surprisingly effective ally. His official investigation into Lady Ashworth's voluntary departure was a smokescreen. His presence here confirmed he smelled a rat, just as I did. I knew he would return to Blackwood Manor. The bloodstain I'd found, and he'd missed, was too damning a detail to ignore. I decided to use his efficiency against him. I made my way to a secluded payphone near the hotel lobby. With a deft movement, I placed a call to the Scotland Yard headquarters, asking for the head of the Criminal Investigation Department. "This is Phryne Fisher," I announced, my voice cool and authoritative. "I'm afraid I have an important, highly sensitive tip regarding the missing Lady Ashworth case. Tell Inspector Robinson that a certain spiderweb has been observed near the Blackwood fireplace." I paused for effect, and also mentioned that I believe the drawing room curtains may hold the key to the sequence of events. The effect, I knew, would be twofold. First, it would instantly clue Robinson in that the spider symbol mentioned in the manager's office was significant, linking his private findings to the crime scene. Second, by mentioning a specific overlooked piece of evidence, the curtains, I would send him scrambling to the Manor, keeping him occupied and away from my next steps. Next, I needed to delve deeper into the Widows' Club. The best way to understand a powerful, secretive society is to understand its money. My driver, Arthur, met me outside. "Where to, Miss Fisher?" "The usual evening of gin and jazz." "Not tonight, Arthur. Tonight, we visit the city, to the heart of London's financial district." We sped through the smoky streets toward the imposing granite buildings where fortunes were made and lost. My target was the Ashworth Trust, the immense financial instrument General Alastair Ashworth had left his wife. Eleanor had controlled a staggering amount of capital, and such wealth was never without enemies. Using a borrowed key from a contact in the Treasury, a favor I often collected, usually in exchange for solving a petty embezzlement case, I found myself in the empty, silent office of Eleanor Ashworth's solicitor. The air was cold, smelling of stale paper and ambition. I quickly located the files marked Ashworth Trust, Private. What I found made my elegant eyebrows lift. The trust was structured with meticulous precision, designed to protect Eleanor's assets from any legal challenge. But one detail was glaringly out of place. An amendment added 6 months ago. It wasn't a standard financial adjustment. It was a clause stating that in the event of Eleanor's unconfirmed disappearance, lasting more than 90 days, her assets, every single penny, would be transferred to the Widows' Club Foundation. Furthermore, Lady Beatrice Sinclair was named the sole executor. The greed was palpable. Eleanor hadn't just vanished. She was worth a fortune, and her disappearance guaranteed that fortune would transfer to the most powerful woman in her social circle. This wasn't just about money. It was about the club's power and control. My mind raced. This gave the entire club a motive. But was it collective, or was Lady Beatrice the true spider at the center of the web? Just as I was about to close the file, my ear caught the faint sound of footsteps echoing in the corridor outside. Heavy, methodical, and distinctly military. Not a solicitor or a clerk. A policeman. I gathered the files and slipped out the back window onto a narrow fire escape, my silk suit snagging slightly on the rusted metal. As I descended, I saw him, Inspector Robinson, his trench coat billowing, standing in the main office doorway, a grim expression on his face. He'd followed my tip, but then his keen mind had likely figured out my next step and doubled back. He saw the open window and rushed to it, his voice tight. "Fisher, stop this nonsense. You're breaking the law." I merely waved a dismissive hand. "Nonsense, Inspector. I'm simply acquiring evidence your bureaucracy would overlook." I hit the ground with a soft thud. "And for the record, I left you a new hat by the fire escape. Yours is terribly unbecoming." I dashed down a hidden alleyway, leaving him to deal with the locked windows and my petty defiance. The chase always invigorated me. The next morning, armed with the knowledge of the will's amendment, I arrived at Lady Beatrice Sinclair's grand townhouse for the promised luncheon. The air inside was thick with perfume and suspicion. The walls were adorned with exotic hunting trophies, antlers, taxidermied beasts, and a particularly unsettling stuffed leopard. Beatrice greeted me with a chillingly polite smile. "Miss Fisher. How delightful that you could join us." Her eyes were cold, assessing. "I understand you've already had a run-in with Scotland Yard." I took a sip of my champagne, meeting her gaze steadily. "Only a minor misunderstanding, Lady Sinclair. The inspector and I have a complicated relationship. He's dreadfully earnest about protocol. I am dreadfully earnest about results." The other widows, dressed in black velvet and pearls, murmured in amusement. They liked the scandal, the audacity. I was exactly the sort of dangerous novelty they craved. "So, Miss Fisher," a sharp-featured woman named Clarice interjected, "what guidance do you seek from us? Are your unconventional investments truly so perplexing?" "They are, Clarice," I replied, leaning in confidentially. "For instance, I'm trying to wrap my head around the concept of a disappearance clause in a trust. It seems rather morbidly convenient." The air in the room froze. Every single widow at the table went still. Lady Beatrice's smile vanished. "I'm afraid I don't follow, Miss Fisher. Such clauses are merely boilerplate legal measures." "Are they?" I challenged, my voice a delicate purr. "Because in the Ashworth Trust, such a clause ensures that Eleanor's entire fortune passes to the foundation, executed by you, Lady Sinclair, if she is simply unconfirmed missing for 3 months. That's a considerable sum, wouldn't you agree? Enough to make someone very, very motivated to keep her gone." The silence was crushing. I had struck gold. Before anyone could speak, a commotion erupted at the doorway. A footman entered, looking terrified, and spoke directly to Lady Beatrice in a low whisper. Her face, usually a mask of control, went chalk white. "Ladies," she announced, her voice strained, "we have an urgent development. The police have just arrived at Blackwood Manor. Inspector Robinson has found something of great importance. He requests every member of the Widows' Club present themselves there immediately." A twist. A sudden, terrifying change in momentum. Robinson was not only retaliating for my deception, but also using my evidence to flush out the suspects. He had turned the tables on my game. As the widows scrambled to fetch their coats, their composure utterly shattered, I felt a familiar thrill. The inspector had just played his hand, putting us both directly in the lion's den. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me, that whatever he had found at the manor was a shocking revelation that would compel the widows, and the reader, to hurry to the next scene. The game of cat and mouse had just become a race against time, and potentially, a race for survival. Chapter 3. The journey back to Blackwood Manor was a frantic rush through the midday traffic. I rode in my own open-top Hispano-Suiza, Arthur navigating expertly while I watched the flurry of police cars and the hastily hired limousines carrying the now frazzled members of the Widows' Club. The sheer panic etched on Lady Beatrice Sinclair's face was more illuminating than any financial document. She wasn't just wealthy, she was terrified. Inspector Robinson had played a brilliant hand. By announcing a discovery and summoning the suspects, he had forced them to abandon their composure and convene at the scene of the crime, under his watchful eye. He was setting a trap, and I was quite happy to be bait. As I swept into Blackwood Manor, the scene was one of contained chaos. Constables bustled about, and the scent of fear, mixed with expensive perfume, hung in the air. The widows clustered in the foyer, exchanging frantic whispers. Robinson spotted me immediately, his flint-grey eyes narrowing as he strode toward me. He looked magnificent in his outrage, his face set, his jaw clenched, a man on the verge of arresting me and kissing me all at once. "Miss Fisher, what in heaven's name were you thinking, calling the yard and impersonating an informant?" he demanded, his voice low and furious. "I was thinking, Inspector," I replied, smoothing my gloves, "that if you had a clue where to look, I wouldn't have to provide you with one." Did you find what I told you to look for? He hesitated, a muscle twitching in his cheek. The drawing room curtains. They were recently replaced. Very recently. Indeed. Fresh velvet. Inspector. And why might one replace curtains that were likely centuries old? To hide a bullet hole, he admitted, his voice barely a growl. A stray round, fired from a small caliber weapon, lodged in the stone wall behind the new fabric. My smile was genuine this time. Excellent work, Inspector. Now we know Eleanor didn't just walk out. She was either shot at or witnessed a shooting. The bloodstain you missed, the replaced curtains. We're looking at a struggle, a cover-up, and now, attempted murder. The bullet wasn't silver, he muttered, shaking his head. It was bronze. Old. A detail for later, I dismissed. Where is the new evidence that required this dramatic performance? Robinson led me through the mansion's dark, winding corridors, his hand briefly brushing my elbow to guide me through a narrow passage, sending a ridiculous shiver down my spine. We reached a smaller, seldom-used parlor, where a single unassuming object sat on a velvet-draped table. It was a small, ornate silver locket. We found it under the floorboards in the study, Robinson explained, his voice losing its heat as he became professional once more. The butler says it belonged to Eleanor's mother, but she never wore it. I picked up the locket. It was heavy, cool silver, intricately etched with a pattern that, with a jolt, I recognized. It was the same design I'd seen subtly woven into the lace trim of Lady Beatrice Sinclair's gown, a stylized spiderweb. It's the club's symbol, I whispered. But why hide it? I flipped the locket open. Inside, nestled against the velvet lining, were not two pictures, but two identical tiny pieces of paper, folded precisely. I unfolded them carefully. The first was a financial receipt for a small amount, dated 3 weeks ago, from a highly discreet, private bank in Geneva. The second was a single, typed name, Lord Montague. I looked up, meeting Robinson's intense gaze. Lord Montague, Inspector, is the current Minister of Commerce. A pillar of London society, married to one of the most devout women in the country, and an utterly disastrous poker player with a penchant for chorus girls. Blackmail, Robinson concluded instantly. Eleanor was using the club's secrets to fund her own interests. The silver locket is the key to her leverage. Just then, a commotion erupted outside. A constable rushed in, his face panicked. Inspector, we need you. Lady Clarice, she's collapsed. Robinson swore under his breath and raced out. I remained, my mind working furiously. The club was a front for something far darker than shared grief. It was a mutual protection society, bound by shared secrets, which Eleanor was now exploiting. Clarice collapsing was not a random event. It was a distraction, or perhaps, a warning. I turned back to the locket. There was a tiny, almost invisible indentation on the inside. I pressed it gently. A barely audible click. The back panel of the locket swung open, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, there was no paper, no diamond, but a small, delicate brass key. It was tarnished and old, unlike the polished silver of the locket. I carefully slipped the key into my glove and closed the locket, replacing it exactly as I found it. I was about to follow Robinson when a shadow fell across the doorway. It was Lady Beatrice Sinclair. Her eyes, stripped of all pretense, were blazing with a terrible icy fury. She hadn't gone with the others. She had stayed behind to watch. "You are tenacious, Miss Fisher," she hissed, her voice low and venomous. "You move too quickly. You ask too many questions. And you have absolutely no place in this." "I find," I retorted, matching her icy composure, "that the secrets worth keeping are the secrets worth investigating. And yours, Lady Sinclair, are beginning to rot. You have no idea what you are unearthing, she warned, taking a step closer. We are widows, yes, but we are also survivors. We protect our own. And anyone who threatens the club, who threatens our stability, they vanish for good. Are you threatening me, Lady Sinclair? I am merely stating a simple fact of nature, she said, her eyes flashing toward the locket on the table. A spider builds its web not just to catch flies, but to destroy intruders. She turned and swept out of the room, her composure regained, leaving me alone with the silent key. She knew the locket was vital. Had she seen me open it? I didn't wait to find out. I had a key, a physical, tangible clue that pointed to a hidden location. It didn't belong to any lock in the manor, or the solicitor's office. This key unlocked the next step in Eleanor's blackmail scheme, the place where she hid the real proof. I hurried out of the mansion, ignoring the worried constables and the distressed widows, including a now-revived Clarice being attended to by Robinson. I had the next move. Arthur, I called, sliding back into the Hispano-Suiza. I need you to drive me to the darkest, quietest, most forgotten street in Whitechapel. Somewhere a high society woman would never be seen, but where her secrets might be perfectly safe. The mystery had moved from the opulent mansions of Mayfair to the dangerous underbelly of London, where elegance was useless and only street smarts could save me. The brass key felt heavy in my glove, a promise of revelation. I knew the key led to the truth, and I suspected the truth was buried deep within the city's corrupt heart. And I was going to find it, even if it meant risking everything. Chapter 4. Whitechapel felt like a different world, a monochrome sketch against the vibrant oil painting of Mayfair. The air here was thick with the smell of stale beer, coal smoke, and desperation. Gone were the uniformed doormen and glittering street lamps. Here, shadows stretched and swallowed every trace of light. My Hispano-Suiza, usually an object of admiration, looked wildly out of place, a peacock among scavenging crows. "This is madness, Miss Fisher," Arthur muttered, his hand resting near his own sidearm. "An old silk factory. Been derelict for 20 years. No high society secret is kept in a place like this." "On the contrary, Arthur," I said, pulling my fur collar higher. "It's the perfect hiding place. No one looks for diamonds in a coal mine." Eleanor was shrewd. She knew the safest place for the club's dirt was where the police, and her peers, would never dare to tread. The factory was a hulking brick structure, its windows cracked and boarded up. I examined the massive, padlocked gate. The key was small, brass, and archaic. It wouldn't fit the modern lock. "The key is not for the factory itself," I mused, running my fingers over the cold metal of the gate. I walked the perimeter, my sharp eyes scanning for the anachronism, the detail that didn't belong. Finally, tucked away in a narrow recess used for coal deliveries, I found it, a small, sturdy oak door, almost swallowed by ivy and grime. On it hung a tiny, antique padlock. I inserted the brass key. It turned with a satisfying thunk. I slipped inside, leaving Arthur on watch. The air inside was freezing, stagnant, and faintly metallic. It smelled like secrets and decay. I lit a small torch I carried in my purse. The room was a cramped, bare office, but a section of the floorboards was newly polished, or rather, newly disturbed. I quickly located a loose seam and pried it open with the heel of my elegant pump. Beneath was a small, lead-lined vault. Inside, neatly stacked and meticulously organized, was Eleanor Ashworth's treasure. Not jewels, but leverage. A dozen heavy ledgers, each labeled with a year. Reels of audio tape, wrapped in silk ribbons. And most damningly, a series of thick manila envelopes, each sealed with a distinctive wax stamp. A tiny, perfectly formed spider. "The Widows' Club," I whispered, pulling out the nearest ledger. "This is not a social organization. It's a network of mutual, profitable silence." The ledger pages were filled with coded entries, but a master key was taped to the inside cover. I scanned the entries, names of powerful men, dates, amounts, and a short description of the debt. Lord M. Montague 10,000 PDS, 1925. Debt. The Canary Cage. Chorus girl alias, no doubt. Sir C.H., Chief Constable Howard 5,000 PDS, 1926. Debt. The Dockyard. Smuggling. Mr. H.S., Harold Sloane, Shipping Magnate 20,000 PDS, 1924. Debt. The Green Poison. Perhaps an insurance scam or worse. My fingers flew through the documents. Eleanor had been bleeding these men dry for years, using the collective, silent power of the club to gather the initial information, then leveraging it for her own gain. This wasn't just blackmail. This was a shadow economy of corruption, controlled by a ring of seemingly respectable widows. Then I reached the last manila envelope, the one at the very top, marked with today's date. I tore open the spider seal. Inside was a single, grainy photograph. It wasn't compromising, not immediately. It was a picture of Inspector Jack Robinson, standing outside a modest house in an unremarkable suburb, talking to an elderly woman. The writing on the back was in Eleanor's elegant script, Robinson's mother. Weak link. Watch. My blood ran cold. Eleanor hadn't just been observing criminals. She had been observing him. She was prepared to use his family to keep him off the scent. The raw, unprotected vulnerability of the man I loved to hate was suddenly laid bare. Thud. The door to the inner room slammed shut, plunging me into total darkness. My torch had flickered out. Clever girl. Phryne. A voice, gravelly and cold, scraped the silence. Just like the spider, you've spun yourself a perfect little trap. I fumbled for my revolver, heart hammering a frantic rhythm. Who's there? Show yourself. Someone who cleans up Lady Beatrice's little messes, the voice replied. A match flared, illuminating a figure standing between me and the bolted door. A hulking man in a thick wool coat, his face obscured by the flickering light. It wasn't the butler, but a thug, a professional. Eleanor was getting greedy, the man said, advancing slowly. She broke the rules. The club is a shield, not a weapon. Beatrice sent me to retrieve the ledgers and ensure the blackmailer vanished forever. So you killed her, I stated, keeping my voice steady despite the cold fear gripping me. She's gone. That's all that matters. He lunged. I sidestepped, the heavy files crashing where I stood moments before. I fired the revolver, the sound deafening in the small space. The shot missed, but the flash blinded him momentarily. I scrambled for the door latch. He recovered instantly, a massive hand grabbing my silk-clad arm, pulling me back with brutal force. My head struck the brick wall. Stars exploded behind my eyes, and the gun clattered away. I warned you, he snarled, his face inches from mine, smelling of sweat and cheap liquor. The club is protected. Just as his grip tightened around my throat, the outer door of the abandoned factory exploded inward with a deafening crash. A commanding voice cut through the darkness. Police. Step away from her. Robinson. He stood silhouetted against the pale light filtering in from the street, his official trench coat replaced by the rumpled one he'd worn in the kitchen, but his presence was entirely that of a man of authority and deadly intent. He was fast, too fast for the thug. A flash, a crack, and the hired muscle crumpled to the floor, stunned but not unconscious. Robinson rushed to me, his composure utterly shattered for a rare electric moment. His hands, usually so reserved, gripped my shoulders, checking for injury. Phryne, are you mad? You walk into a den of corruption armed with a hairpin and a cocktail dress. His voice was rough with relief and fury. I had a key, Inspector, I managed, fighting to steady my breath and the dizzying beat of my heart. The sight of him, winded and furious, saving me, sent a ridiculous, unsettling wave of emotion through me. And now I have the evidence. The club is blackmailing half of London. I pointed to the open vault, ignoring the dazed brute on the floor. This is everything. Lord Montague, Sir Howard. The corruption goes right to your own doorstep. Robinson knelt by the vault, his eyes scanning the ledgers. The sheer scale of the operation clearly staggered him. This is treasonous, he whispered, running a hand through his perpetually neat hair. It's a web that controls the city. And the spider at the center, I said, my gaze catching his, is Lady Beatrice Sinclair. Suddenly, the subdued thug on the floor gave a gurgling laugh. He pushed himself up onto his elbows, his eyes fixed on Robinson. Beatrice? Nah. She's just the caretaker. He spat blood. Eleanor found something bigger. The real money isn't in blackmail. It's in eliminating the competition. The club's husbands, they weren't accidents, Inspector. It was a final score. He paused, his voice dropping to a rasp. And the whole lot of them, Beatrice, Clarice, all the widows, are about to pay for it. The real killer, the one who took Eleanor, he's planning a grand finale. Before either of us could react, he violently slammed his head against the sharp brick corner of the vault, silencing himself permanently. Robinson grabbed the man's coat, but it was too late. He looked at me, his eyes wide with horror and realization. The threat wasn't just to me, it was to the entire Widows' Club. They had thought they were the predators, but they were, in fact, the next victims. The grand finale, I repeated, shivering. He's going to wipe them all out. Then my eyes fell on the final piece of evidence, the latest, most urgent entry in the ledger, written in Eleanor's frantic hand, dated the day she vanished. It was an address, the Masquerade Ball Street, Jude's Hall, midnight. Where is St. Jude's Hall? I asked, already moving toward the door. Robinson pulled me to a stop, his grip firm. That's where the Widows' Club is holding their annual charity ball tonight. A black tie masquerade. Every member will be there. Every last one of them. Then we haven't a moment to lose, Inspector, I said, a dangerous excitement replacing the fear. The killer is planning to strike tonight, at midnight. The stage is set for the grand finale. And if we're going to catch the real spider, we'll have to crash the party. Chapter 5. The Black Tie Masquerade Ball at St. Jude's Hall was London's most anticipated event of the season, a glittering vortex of wealth, decadence, and hidden faces. Tonight, however, it was a ticking clock. I arrived precisely at 11:30, draped in a gown of shimmering gold lame that felt utterly scandalous. A crimson mask concealed the upper half of my face, lending me an air of theatrical danger. I carried no large purse, only a small, jeweled clutch containing my emergency lockpicking kit and the pearl-handled revolver. If a murderer was planning a grand finale, I intended to be the star attraction. Arthur dropped me at the entrance, his face a mask of worry. "Be careful, Miss Fisher. The inspector said he'd meet you inside." "I always am, Arthur," I murmured, "and the inspector always plays the hero too late." The hall was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers blazed, music from a full jazz orchestra thumped with intoxicating rhythm, and hundreds of masked guests spun across the polished floor. Every face was hidden behind lace, velvet, and feathers, the perfect anonymity for a killer. I quickly located the members of the Widows' Club, grouped around a champagne fountain like a flock of nervous, black-clad birds. They were all there, every woman Eleanor had used, every potential victim of this grand finale. Lady Beatrice, in a voluminous gown and a mask of intricate black lace, was a nervous wreck, her eyes darting constantly. Clarice looked pale and refused to drink the champagne. They knew they were exposed, but they didn't know the identity of the person coming for them. I circled the perimeter, my sharp eyes cutting through the elegant chaos. I was looking for the predator, someone who didn't dance, didn't drink, and was entirely too focused. Just as I moved past the orchestra platform, a hand closed firmly around my elbow. "You're late, Miss Fisher." I turned, suppressing the shiver that always accompanied his touch. Inspector Robinson. He was wearing an impossibly severe black domino mask, which only highlighted the strong lines of his jaw and the intensity of his gaze. In his formal evening dress, he looked less like a policeman and more like a dangerous aristocratic rake, a highly unsettling image. "Inspector," I purred, "I merely wish to make an entrance. And might I say, black suits you. It's a vast improvement over the flower and cycling cap." "This is not a game, Phryne," he said, his voice taut. "We have less than 30 minutes until midnight." The thug in Whitechapel confirmed the murderer is targeting the entire club for what he called a final score. Revenge for the death of all their husbands, not just the general. "Then we have a shared enemy," I noted, watching Beatrice pace anxiously. "The killer is someone who believes the club is responsible for a string of deaths. Someone who has suffered at the hands of those widows and their web of corruption." Robinson's eyes swept the room. "The doors are locked, and my constables are disguised as waiters. But this place is too large, too chaotic. We need to find the killer before they reach the club." "The killer will come to them, Inspector," I countered, spotting a flicker of movement near the balcony overlooking the dance floor. "A grand finale requires an audience and a grand gesture. I believe our man will want to watch his prey." We moved through the crowd, our synchronicity undeniable. He was the anchor, the grim authority. I was the shimmering distraction, the quick, darting intelligence. The sexual tension between us was a physical thing, a live wire stretched taut between duty and recklessness. As we reached the grand staircase, I saw her. Lady Beatrice, abandoning her guard, rushed toward a quiet, candlelit corner of the room. She was meeting someone. "Robinson," I whispered, pointing. "She's meeting the killer. Or an accomplice." We raced forward. The corner was shielded by a huge velvet curtain, creating a private alcove. We slipped behind it just in time to hear Beatrice's frantic voice. "It wasn't me. I swear, I had nothing to do with the general's death. I only used his trust amendment to protect the club." A calm, chillingly familiar voice replied, "Protect? You built an empire on blood, Beatrice. You helped them all, every widow, hide their sins. And now you will atone for them." The voice was that of Lord Montague, the Minister of Commerce, whom Eleanor had been blackmailing. But why would he kill Eleanor, and now the entire club? "I never hurt anyone," Beatrice pleaded. "Not with your own hands, perhaps," Montague sneered. He stepped into the light, revealing a simple grey mask that covered his eyes, a striking contrast to his white tie attire. "But your husband, the general, helped run the opium trade that poisoned my sister. And when I tried to expose him, you had him silenced." Montague reached into his jacket pocket. In his hand, he produced a small antique bronze pistol, the same caliber weapon that had left the bullet hole in the Blackwood curtains. "The truth will finally be revealed tonight," he stated, raising the weapon. "The Widows' Club is responsible for a dozen deaths. And tonight, they pay the final score." Before he could fire, I lunged, throwing myself onto Beatrice. Robinson, moving with the speed of a striking viper, tackled Montague. The shot rang out, muffled by my scream, shattering the chandelier above the dance floor. Crystal rained down, causing immediate panic. The orchestra cut out. Screams erupted as the partygoers realized the chaos was not a staged spectacle. Robinson wrestled the gun from Montague, pinning the minister to the floor. "It's over, Montague. Where is Lady Ashworth?" Montague smiled, a terrifying expression of mad zealotry. She's where all the secrets of the club are buried, Inspector. In the walls. In the very foundations. I pulled Lady Beatrice to her feet. She was weeping hysterically. The general. He was having an affair. I only hired someone to take his ledgers, not to kill him. And what about Eleanor? I demanded, shaking her. She knew everything. Beatrice cried. She was going to expose the club, not just for the general's death, but for the truth about the foundation. The truth about my husband's death. Just then, a shrill bell began to toll from the tower of St. Jude's Hall. Midnight. Robinson, his eyes locked on the minister, suddenly looked sickened. The foundation. The money. Phryne, the foundation is funding the restoration of this building. This hall. I looked up at the towering centuries-old stone structure, then down at the distraught widows who were frantically trying to flee the room. Montague laughed, a chilling, final sound. The general's money. All of it. The Widows' Club Foundation was the perfect vehicle. I simply waited until they poured every last shilling, every last secret, into this magnificent tomb. He struggled against Robinson's grip, his voice booming out into the panicked silence of the ballroom. The bomb, Inspector. It's in the foundations. You're all trapped. The sheer, terrifying scale of the plot hit me with the force of a physical blow. The grand finale wasn't just a murder. It was an act of mass destruction, orchestrated using the victim's own money. The doors. Robinson roared at his constables. Unlock the doors now. But I knew there wasn't time. The tolling bell, the crumbling foundations, the murderer's chilling smile. It all pointed to an immediate, catastrophic end. I grabbed Robinson's tie, pulling his face close, my crimson mask practically touching his black one. The clock tower. The mechanism must be connected to the bell. It's too high. We won't make it, he snapped, but his eyes were already burning with decision. I didn't wait. Shoving the small brass key I'd taken from Eleanor's locket into his hand, I gave him the most serious look I could muster. This key fits the clock tower maintenance door. Go. I'll hold Montague. He hesitated for a vital second, his hand clutching the key, his gaze locked with mine, a moment suspended between duty and desire. If you die, Phryne, then you'll never find out what's under this dress, Inspector. Now go. He bolted, disappearing into the chaos toward the staircase. I turned back to Montague, who was now being subdued by two constables. The screams were rising, and the rhythmic thump-thump-thump of the clock bell continued its deadly countdown. The floor beneath my feet trembled. I had moments to save the man I loved, the women I hated, and the city he protected. This was the end. The final, explosive question. Could Phryne Fisher save them all before midnight became oblivion?